Metal Gear Solid 5 Ground Zeroes is an action stealth game from 2014, both chronologically and by publication a sequel to Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker. The Fox engine, used for the first time in Ground Zeroes, is fundamentally different from all prior Metal Gear games. It features a conventional third-person camera, where the view is always over the shoulder rather than behind the neck, and features a revamped movement system. The player has 3 speeds: stalking, walking, and sprinting, 4 traversal stances: standing, crouching, prone, and finally 2 more contextual stances: hanging and rolling. There is no stamina meter and no camo rating. You are simply expected to know, given your apparent surroundings, whether you could reasonably be seen in your current position by another human being. Enemies see far, hear well, and often are rather active. Ground Zeroes is incredibly micro-positional. The decision between walking across a map section crouched and rolling across can be the sole factor in your detection. Where Big Boss is on the screen at any given time is extremely important for gameplay, both in relation to using items as well as stealth. Certainly, the design premise of Ground Zeroes is executive precision. Every move must be calculated and performed at the precise time necessary, because in Ground Zeroes, the entire level is one map, and everyone on that map gets active from the moment the player spawns in. Thus, macro positioning is still present and given importance. The whole game, the elements of the level, and the player all move and act simultaneously and independently. The greater acuity of your enemies, as well as the larger number of mechanical options for traversal, combined finally with the new camera, gives us the impression also that the objective of game design was verisimilitude. Despite this, that the player is given the most mechanical options concerning movement, the player actually has very little direct control over Big Boss. For instance, you can move in any direction, but you're given this heel turn, where you can't just change your orientation. You have to wait a quarter second for Big Boss to turn around. Another addition, conspicuously also featured in Assassin's Creed, is a contextual interaction button, which is awesome because I love contextual interaction. I love interacting with every part of the map in the single way prescribed for me by the designer. Providing so many options while taking away so much actual direct control is an irrational design choice. Menu elements also enter the game through the iDroid, but are properly integrated with gameplay and separate from the pause menu. Although the iDroid itself is rather annoying to use, I argue this is an error in execution rather than a problem with the design. I am, however, of the position that calling Morpho should have had its own hotkey in addition to its presence in the iDroid. Finally, a common criticism that Ground Zeroes gets is that it's short, which is false. S-ranking Ground Zeroes on hard took me around 3 weekdays, and S-ranking the other missions took me a whole weekend day. That's roughly an entire weekend straight of gameplay, and I'm currently sitting at 12.5 hours of playtime on Steam. Is that really that short? Not only this, but I downloaded a save game just to get to play the missions on hard without having to play them on normal first. On a fresh save, you might have to take twice as many hours to S-rank the game on hard. A whole day straight, from midnight to midnight, is not short. The simple fact of the matter is that the short, or lack of content, so-called criticisms come from dilettantes. Nonetheless, it is true that there are only a handful of missions, but what those have to offer is more important than mere quantity. Let us see then what content Ground Zeroes as a game has to offer. There are 7 missions, divided into 1 main op, 3 side ops, and 2 extra ops. The main op, Ground Zeroes, starts on a corner of the map, with Big Boss proceeding up a cliffside to start the level. You encounter 3 enemies, one standing looking away from you, one approaching from the other side of the fence to the left, and one in a watchtower looking towards you. The best route past these enemies is to use the time-calling Morpho to wait for the light operator to sweep his view to his right, after which you can climb up the mountain and drop down behind these 3 enemies. You'll cross a fork in the road, and in the encampment itself are at least 3 soldiers, 1 on the inner half of the camp, nearer to the base, and 2 on the outer half. Only the 2 in the outer half have a chance of seeing you on the route I took. The watchtower can technically see you here, I think, but I'm not entirely sure as I've never been detected by it. As you stop rolling into the street, 1 soldier proceeds up the hill from the prison. Make sure you miss your first few shots for the true Ground Zeroes experience. There's no one on the path up the hill after this to see you, but you can be seen if your timing is off. 1 soldier is stationed outside the camp and 1 within it. I've only ever been seen by these 2 if I massively screw up. Your time here is more often spent missing headshots than trying not to get detected, since neither of them can see you at all if you approach it efficiently. Following this, you'll get the cutscene with Chico. To get this over with as fast as possible, hold R or whatever your pickup button is as you hit skip. As long as you don't get hit with epic contextual animations, you'll turn around and sprint down the cliff face. 2 soldiers are proceeding down the other side of the hill towards the prison. As long as you hug the left side of this path, they won't see you. The problem here is this stupid tape you listen to automatically when you throw Chico into the helicopter. After the first listen, it only serves to obstruct your ability to hear your enemies or how loud you yourself are being. Furthermore, the information given is useless after the first playthrough because you already know where Paz is. Up on the other side of the hill are still those 2 soldiers with 2 additional ones on the road. As we've used very little of the map so far, the route taken for efficiency's sake does have you interact with almost every patrol along it, and the trend continues here, where you're so close to the 2 soldiers at the bottom of the hill, they can hear you and perhaps even see you if your path is anything but perfect. Stealthily boarding the truck is probably most players' first instinct. And yes, it works, but you have to wait for the driver to enter the truck prior. It's not an incredibly precise timing. I've seen people steal the truck, but my execution isn't on that level. So roughly the next minute and 15 seconds are spent waiting. But I did miss it a few times in jumping off the truck while the closest rifleman is looking away. On the path through the red door is another rifleman, though he is incredibly easy to neutralize, and a camera, which is also an easy thing to pass. 2 soldiers are at the bottom of this stairway, but you don't have to interact with them unless you are loud coming down. Paz is in this giant generator room. I don't know why. They could have easily put her in a cage at the opposite side of the little end room that you enter into. You watch the cutscene and then run right back out the route you came in. There are a few soldiers outside, but if you mark Morpho to pick you up at the spawn point, you can basically walk right out with a few tranquilizations on the way. I, however, got caught almost instantly and was able to sprint to Morpho, and still got the S for my time despite the alert. Overall, not a terrible level. Mechanically demanding with high precision timing, but the main problem is the objective placement is very poor. Both are on the far side of the map from your spawn point, but relatively close to each other, leaving about 45% of the map completely unused. The main problem here isn't so much that any of the map besides the secondary road is under-patrolled, but that the objectives don't incentivize full utilization of the surface area. In Eliminate the Renegade Threat, you are tasked with eliminating 2 war criminals who make up a sniper team that operated in Laos. The elimination, as with Peace Walker, has to be non-lethal, otherwise it's penalized. Thankfully, Ground Zero's rank system works entirely on score, so you can get away with killing them, even though morally it's perfectly permissible for Big Boss to do so. We start at the beginning of the second half of the Ground Zeroes mission, at the lowest point on the hill. This mission is so short using this strategy that it's reasonable to immediately tell Morpho to pick you up here. Sprint up the hill and drop down to prone. There's one lookout on the cliff, but he never turns around for some reason. On the road, there's one guy who walks up and then breaks into a jog the moment a jeep going down passes him by. After this, the only person who can see you before you take your sniper shots is on the right, and the only person who can see you after taking them is on your left. Whether or not you have the rifle decides your next action, which is really stupid because you only unlock it once you get an A rank already, but you need it to get the fastest S rank, and it's to your right up on the second hill in a truck with one further patrol, but this patrol himself does literally nothing. I tranquilized him just to be safe, but I'm sure if you wanted to, you could make a much more perfect route that avoided his gaze. Nonetheless, it adds about 30 seconds to your mission time to not have the rifle at the start. The placement of your targets is extra stupid in this mission because you can see them both from the tower on the side of the map closest to your spawn point, meaning your whole mission path, given you've unlocked the sniper, is almost a straight line back and forth. What's the point here? Why even have you move for the mission if the only hard part is, maybe, if you didn't trank every guy you needed to, getting the 2 shots on your targets? And if you did tranquilize every guy you needed to, then this is a piece of cake because they don't move, because they aren't alerted. The objective being so easily accessed from the start of the map just makes the whole mission itself pointless. The next in sequence is Intel Operative Rescue. The first half is honestly an on-rails shooter. It's not that good. You're never threatened by any of the enemies, and neither is the guy you're supposed to defend. You're faced with a few enemies on the ground, and yes, I did die to the heavy armor, but I heard that you could retry and still get the S, so I went for that. It worked, and I honestly don't know what to say about this mission. It's just extremely low effort, and the scoring is far too lenient. Classified Intel Acquisition has by far the worst opening of any mission ever. You start in a truck, and to do the mission optimally, you have to just wait. Cut everything up till Kazuhira says a black site, because that's when you actually jump out of the truck. The truck continues towards the main base, and around this building is one approaching patrol. Here, the micro-positioning becomes important again, as to reasonably land a headshot, you have to approach the hillside prone. Once he's down, you can safely enter the APC. The problem with the APC here is that the criteria for detection while you are inside it, for a game with so much verisimilitude, is ridiculous. If you crash or touch anything while driving, you're identified as an enemy. Hopefully all the bad drivers on base are aware. You drive up to the entrance, timing your entry through the door such that the patrol isn't looking towards you as you enter, giving you a chance to headshot him with your tranquilizer. No camera watches the corner in this mission for some reason, so you're perfectly free to run all the way downstairs to threaten a guy for a cassette tape. Once you do that, you can choke him out and do whatever you want with him. But you'll essentially return up the stairs and to the APC. I neglected on my other runs to also tranquilize the soldiers outside the base, because despite the game supposedly being more, quote, realistic, unquote, than the other games, Big Boss always enters and exits the APC from the left side. Why? This is such a bizarre choice that I have to believe this was a mistake or some limitation of the release. I have no idea what this is. Anyways, once you get into the APC without alerts, you're home free. This mission, on its face as I've described it, would seem simple, but I do appreciate the fine execution required for some of the maneuvers, especially timing your entrance through the red door properly, because that messed me up a lot. It only counterbalances the problems, though. It doesn't outweigh them. Destroy the anti-air emplacements is an example of bad map design. All the AA guns you need to hit are visible to you from the spawn point, meaning, hypothetically, you don't even have to move to beat the level. The only slightly challenging part of this map is managing the location of soldiers in relation to their AA guns, in order to make sure you don't kill them and ruin your rank. You do this for one soldier who refuses to move. You have to tranquilize him and the other 2 patrols nearby, then run down and pick him up and put him down in a safe place. Then you dash right back up to your spawn point and start shooting the AA guns with your recoilless rifle. An APC appears, and you do need to move to hit it, but ironically, you move in the direction of Morpho's LZ, so it can hardly be considered difficult or meaningful. Just a terrible side op overall. Deja Vu suffers from poor objective placement and bad objective design. The enemy placement, on the other hand, isn't so bad. You spawn in on the same hill as the second mission, just higher up. The objectives are, for the most part, to simply walk from one location to another. The base is strangely empty, and you can do the objectives in any order. But there is a jeep with 2 soldiers that will drive up when you hit the power, so you can enter safely from the red door. There's still nobody inside the base, at least that can see you, so you get a cutscene with Psycho Mantis. You then sprint as loud as you want over the ladder on the right. Since the tranquilizer is in the watchtower, it'll make the rest of the level easier, specifically sleeping the guy sent to check the power. The Easter Island statue is downstairs where the cassette holder was during Intel acquisition, and I have to admit the cutscene did come off as silly in a good way. Back up the stairs out the way you entered towards the helipad, guarded by 2 guys. Almost forgot to grab the grenades, but ironically you're not threatened with detection by the helicopter guys, only a third party watching the gate. Of course, this problem isn't solved by having an objective be placed at the chopper, because you only have to look at it. You're not forced to approach or avoid the senses of the 2 patrols with any significance of gameplay. After that, run back inside and into the duct. The challenge in Deja Vu is supposedly in finding the objectives, but of course that never works out, since replaying the mission, you'll know where they are. It's too easy and the objectives are garbage. Even the aesthetic is a little lacking. Finally, we get to Jamais Vu. As with Peace Walker, the cool stuff is at the very end, cause you finally get to play as Raiden. Additionally, the opening cutscene is awesome, both in the amusing jokes about the watermelons and the framing at the end.
Occupying the Cuban naval base and prison camp. There's no telling what'll happen to the world if you lose. The fate of the human race is in your hands, Raiden.
Your objective here is to neutralize 12 soldiers. And this, I think, is the only mission in all of Metal Gear where you can technically directly kill enemies without being penalized. Which is cool for once, and rather appropriate for Raiden, as Rising came out the previous year. The tally includes both human and Snatcher enemies, so you're incentivized to stop and surveil in traditional Metal Gear fashion, with the added twist of using your new Mark Enemy ability to find out which bad guys are body snatchers. It's a really neat idea that utilizes a characteristic mechanic of the game. But the problem remains, as with Deja Vu, that once you memorize who's who, you can discard it. There are 4 enemies outside the main base, 1 in the watchtower, 1 in the camp, 1 near the garages, and 1 in the tower overseeing the garages. Now, the problem is that none of them threaten you with detection. None of them look at you or are put in the level such as to anticipate the player's approach. Having dispatched the men outside, you can sprint away and drop the doorman in front of the gate. There's a security camera watching the back staircase to the basement this time, but cameras aren't a big deal when you're given a silenced rifle at the start. One more guy in the back, And here's a good example of micro-positioning. Since approaching him any other way than prone or rolling, he'll instantly see you. 3 eyes are in the main base, 1 towards the basement, away from the camera, and 2 snatchers right next to an explosive barrel. The solution is obvious. The final pair arrive in a Jeep, driving towards the rear entrance. Personally, I waited for them to get close rather than trying to take them out at a distance. Following your completion of the main objective, an action sequence begins. The sequence itself isn't hard, but it's fun being able to cut loose and shoot back at the bad guys for once. The sequence isn't designed to make you move should you take up a high position, since enemies don't take cover enough, or at least any cover which would save them from a recoilless rifle. This goes for the chopper too. It isn't threatening. Pretty okay mission. Maybe the second best. I just wanted to do some supplementary map analysis for Ground Zeroes because I don't think I illustrated that there's not enough diversity in objective placement to justify the missions besides, I would say, Ground Zeroes and Jamais Vu, because, I mean, those are hands down the best missions, but they're also good because their objectives are so different from one another. The other missions are not significantly diverse enough to warrant their inclusion in this game. And to illustrate that, I've sort of drawn out a path of all the missions. So this is Ground Zeroes. You follow it from up the cliff. Actually, we'll just do destroy the AA guns first. That is literally just that part, kind of. Well, literally on this line, because you can shoot all the AA guns from this cliff here, and then you walk back and shoot the APC from about right here, or maybe it's right here, maybe. But regardless, that whole mission is played right there. Well, technically, the meat of the mission is there. If you really want to get specific, technically you do take this guy here and then go back to make sure you don't lose points from killing him. You put him in a safe place. But other than that, there's not much to that mission. Back to Ground Zeroes. Take your path alongside the watchtower, into the base, through the camp. Now, this isn't to say the path itself is bad. It's to say in relation to each other, they're essentially it kind of feels samey in a way. Not in the objective design, but in placement. So, up here, and then through the camp, right, down to the little outside prison. The problem with this part, this whole sort of section of the map, is that you never use it except on Ground Zeroes. There's a problem with this in that you never use it ever, but the problem here is that, like, this whole section of the map is only used, well, actually, this whole part of the map, denoted with the chevron right here, is just not used except on Ground Zeroes, which is a waste of space, to be honest. The map design does not lend itself to a huge arrangement of missions. It's pretty much designed for Ground Zeroes, and then they retroactively had to put other missions on it, which is not good design if you want to make an open world, semi-open world game. Or at least if you want to place multiple missions on a single map. And then you follow that down to here, you extract Chico, and then this line up to basically this part, this spawn point up to where the truck stops so that you can jump in it. That's used on eliminate the renegade threat. Why would you not have us spawn like here? And, maybe go up to this watchtower and try and snipe him, right? Snipe the 2 guys. Because then you have, maybe by putting one guy close and one guy far, but then having him be out of sight or hard to see, hard to shoot at or eliminate in one way or another, could incentivize or necessitate more use of floor space. But the way it is designed does not incentivize the use of this entire map, or at least any part of the map we haven't already been in, or isn't already used by some part of the game. So that's eliminate the renegade threat. The only unique part of it really is getting into this watchtower and then the getting into the truck to get the sniper rifle if you haven't already unlocked it. If you have, then it's just this line from this spawn to here and then back, with, of course, tranquilizations on the way. Again, my point isn't that the objective design is bad. I made that, I would say with Deja Vu, the objective design is bad. That's probably the only one that has bad objective design. For the most part, the rest of the game just has bad objective placement. You know, Ground Zeroes, come on. If it's like the premier mission of the game, if it is the game, you know, the title mission, then I gotta be in Camp Omega, right? I can't just be running along basically the outside of the camp. It doesn't make sense. But that's a different kind of critique that's not really as imperative to address. So that's eliminating the renegade threat. So you already have mission paths reused in 3 so far out of 7, that's not looking good. You proceed into here, and guess what this resembles? Yeah, that is basically where you start the mission for classified intel acquisition. Now, you can, I think, in intel acquisition, follow the truck all the way into the base. You don't need to, because I didn't, because right here, you jump out and tranquilize this guy and then snatch the APC. Then you go into the base. What does that look like? Classified intel acquisition and Ground Zeroes both use almost the exact same part of the base for their objective. It's one room apart. Paz and the guy are in different rooms, so it's not that bad, but still, the underground portion of the base is not well designed. I would say that's my main critique of Camp Omega. Besides the outside of the objective placement, my critique of the map itself is that the main base is not well designed. The underground portion, you can only do one thing in it. There's not much to it. Oh, and this circle I made because this is basically the entirety of Intel Operative Rescue. The rest is just flying around. The entirety of Intel Operative Rescue basically takes place in this one small section. So this is an area, this isn't a mission path. Still, though, it's not outside any of the other mission paths. You know, it intersects with at least one of them, and it's right next to 2 others. And Jamais probably has the most varied mission path for efficiency. And when I say mission paths, I do mean efficient mission paths. I'm not talking about, like, sure, you could have ran all over the map not doing the objective, right? And called that a mission path and said, well, I use the whole map. It's not really relevant if it doesn't get the S rank. If you're not playing the game the way the game scores you, the way the game evaluates you according to its own metrics of evaluation, then the critique isn't really relevant. So it does have to do with efficient mission paths. Jamais Vu, though, in terms of mission path variation, probably has the biggest, the most variation because, well, Deja Vu is kind of like, how would I describe Deja Vu? Deja Vu kind of does fill up some of the space we haven't used, but you're really just using this small part in front of the base in addition. And then, you know, of course, you're running back into the vent. So really, you're just using the more of the open area around the main part of Camp Omega. Other than that, my main problem is this whole part of the map is not used. There is no use of this ever, except when you're leaving in classified intel acquisition. So why the fuck is it even here? It's a very bad design choice. So overall, Deja Vu does use some extra map space that isn't used before in terms of efficiency, but most mission paths do not have you using the entirety of the map. So a lot of the mission paths are reused, even though the mission paths themselves have variation to them, and they're obviously not exactly the same. The fact that so many of them overlap or find you in the same part of the map, same area of the map, especially here, there's so much overlap here. You use this small part of Camp Omega so much that it really begs the question why it's so small. That pretty much sums up my map critique, is the question of why this is so small if it's used so much, why this is so large if it's never used, and why this part of the map is even here if it's designed for such a small niche of gameplay in the greater game. It's very nonsensical at the end of the day.
Now, ranking the missions, I would have to go Ground Zeroes, Jamais Vu, Eliminate the Renegade Threat, Classified Intel Acquisition, Deja Vu, Intel Operative Acquisition, and Destroy the Anti-Air Emplacements. So the game gets worse down the line until you get to Jamais Vu. The problem with most of the bad missions, as in anything besides Ground Zeroes and Jamais Vu, is either their objectives are terrible in design, or the level design doesn't force you to move or otherwise threaten you with detection.
Difficulty in Ground Zeroes is a funny thing. Numerically, statistically, all enemies are very sharp. They hear a great distance and have good vision. However, because of their placement and the map design, most of them don't have a chance to detect the player, as long as you're not incredibly stupid. Approaches from objective to objective often find them looking away, walking in another direction, or at such a distance that they are easy to tranquilize if you halt and remain still. Furthermore, the unlockable weapons in most cases don't seriously offset the player's capabilities. They are all lethal, and the one non-lethal isn't silenced. The worst case is in the AA gun mission, but that's an outlier. The only other one truly influenced by a starting weapon is the elimination mission, yet not to such a degree as to transform a game plan entirely. Of game plans, you are often so influenced by the astuteness of patrols in your decision-making that you won't notice them once you find a good path. Straying from this, either in the micro or the macro, gets you caught almost instantly. Ground Zeroes isn't lacking in the department of arduousness, but the manifestation of it arrives with greater and greater subtlety as the player becomes more acquainted and more skilled with the game.
The difficulty is at least designed rather well, even if the levels, for the most part, are not. But all the missions are easier than Peace Walker's hardest missions. Does the scoring make sense? Yes! And no. Different missions have different S-rank thresholds, which itself does not make sense. This is shit. Oh, what? Okay. Shouldn't the par time be scored such that, combined with no alerts, no kills, no retries, no reflex, come out to 50,000? Yes, I know that the main mission has an at least 52,000 threshold for an S rank, but why 52,000? What's the significance of that number? It's completely arbitrary. And if it's arbitrary, at least make it a nice sounding number. Why not 100K? Why not go for 100 billion? Why not go for 377 quadrillion? A fraction with a denominator 5 would make more sense, for example. You hit the par time, you get a point. You do it with no kills, you get another point, and so on. 5 out of 5 is thus an S rank. Because really, there's no point. If you kill even one person in most missions, you're mathematically just not able to get the S due to the time it takes to complete the mission in question. Now, we can get into the artistic decision behind this, But if the point is that Big Boss has decided that some killing is acceptable, as the scoring prior was meant to demonstrate your closeness to Big Boss's battle philosophy, then why are we penalized for executing the child killers in Eliminate the Renegade Threat? Big Boss finds it inexcusable to take out war criminals, people who murder innocents. There's no artistic consistency to the ranking system in Ground Zeroes, though it does work for the gameplay. S ranks are not an unreasonable task, nor are they too easy overall, and the way you acquire them is consistent with the stealth action premise of the greater Metal Gear Solid series. For the flavor, the idea of Ground Zeroes, apart from the other Metal Gear games that I've reviewed so far, is precision. In an Aristotelian sense, no greater and no lesser. Dead center on the axis, and nothing apart from what is necessary, lest ye be seen. A serpent arrives no earlier and no later than it should. He arrives precisely when he intends to. I would like to address the change in voice actor for Big Boss, from Hayter to Sutherland. If it was an executive decision by Kojima, seeing as the 5 series is arguably a soft reboot of the franchise, I cannot object purely on the grounds of tradition. Big Boss kills on screen, where in previous games his only confirmed kill is his mentor. Furthermore, if boss ranks in prior Metal Gear games have no kill requirements, we can clearly understand his methodology and depiction prior to 5. And that 5 is a break in that tradition. A sequel which significantly changes the aesthetics and mechanics that were once in Metal Gear. If Big Boss is different, it is understandable that his voice actor is changed. And furthermore, that the facial recognition software required a screen actor, but it could certainly be done with a screen actor and a voice actor playing their respective parts. So long as the game itself is good, the objection might be minimal, but that conclusion is to be drawn at the end, and not here. Before I continue, I would like to touch on the fact that it's present in the story that pause is violated. These things happen, but are inappropriate for depiction, for the most part due to obscenity and scandal. In the case of Metal Gear specifically, what Kojima has attempted to do is transform this somewhat satirical military espionage fantasy into a hard-hitting, realistic depiction of 20th century conflicts. Is this truly fitting? No. There is no such world in which we can reconcile the chimeric pastiche of Metal Gear with its giant screw-propelled nuclear tanks, flying kidnapper drones, electric generals, and cat-like special forces appearing alongside such graphic immorality, especially when one of the victims is a minor. Do not confuse this with saying that such fantasy or outlandish fiction is necessarily alien to thematic, philosophical, or narrative gravity. Do understand that this decision was a thoroughly foolish and inappropriate executive choice by director Hideo Kojima. And that's all I have to say about that. So we return to the philosophical critique of Ground Zeroes, the last game in both publication and chronology where you play as Big Boss. This is it, the last hurrah, his final charge. But there is no fanfare, no mother base to welcome him and celebrate this minor victory. The treachery of Cypher incinerates his goodwill. We see here the true separation between Cypher and Big Boss, where Cypher has created the XOF, literally an anti-Fox unit, and solidified himself as a sequestered, invisible satanic figure, where Big Boss is the ever-present and visible hero. This is not to compare Big Boss, who has steeped himself in the moral errors of liberalism, due in most part to his mentorship by the boss, to our savior and redeemer, but to say at least that Big Boss has matured fully into a notorious and sufficiently moral counterweight to the occult Cypher and his borderless, near-Masonic network of espionage and evil. The MSF were a thunderbolt in history. Faster than the eye, striking with intensity, and gone just as soon. What did they achieve? Certainly, in the uncovered history between the games, Big Boss's philanthropy via arms and armor was at least noticed by the world. In Peace Walker,
Despite Cypher's espionage, Big Boss does achieve real results that are truly his own. By exorcism of his mentor's ghost and neutralization of the global thermonuclear threat, he turns himself into Big Boss from the mere snake he was in the Russian wilderness. Such is not the case during the twilight of the Peace Walkers. Their humanitarian mercenary work is folly, their hope is dashed, their future burns. It is only by the sacrifice of Paz that Big Boss survives. In her final moments, she shows mercy and breaks her dark pact with Cypher, the stark opposite to Peace Walker, where her last confrontation is in allegiance to him. Her final farewell changes the course of history forever. There also is Chico. Whether or not he gave up his compadres, he is not culpable. He is only a child, and the fortitude befitting a man cannot be demanded of him. It is ironic that the actions of the meekest would save those we thought so strong. The ground zeros of hope in despair were in their hearts. Big Boss's trust did not bring him to Camp Omega. Not his belief in himself that could be questioned by a ghost, but his acknowledgement of his own error, that he could fail someone, that his judgment had been betrayed. In the dead of night, through the rainfall, the hero returns. And what does he find? Doom. The fate for himself he had sealed in the Peace Walker incident. Was it the times, boss? Of course not. How appalling. A farcical fancy. To think that a nebulous, unfocused point made out of desire for depth would be his undoing. No, it was his refusal to accept victory, his inability to crush Cypher when he had the chance. That brought him from his finest hour to his darkest. The reality is that Big Boss never stopped working for Major Zero after Operation Snake Eater, but continued to do so up until this very moment, unknowingly, though not without incident. The Schism by Fire. Here, Cypher discards his former hero fully, replacing him with a demon. Why did Cypher trust Big Boss before this to ignorantly follow the unconscious trail of directions given to him? Cypher believed that their shared mentorship ensured Big Boss could give up his ascent to justice, as their mentor did by her actions, though not by her desire, as the Peace Walker demonstrated in its exorcism. However, because Big Boss refused to compromise what he is, a weapon against injustice, being just in battle always, Cypher found that he could not be entrusted as the body to his mind, as the venom of the Patriots, and so constructed the plan to slay him with his own sibling in arms. For the enemies of Big Boss, the trichotomy and its ilk, betrayal is not merely a possibility, but the rule. Yet, because Big Boss's fealty, and thus the loyalty of his men-at-arms, is to something greater than him, being a natural justice, a war against the despotism of any among the trichotomy, that betrayal was out of the question for them. The small victory of Big Boss against Cypher is there, that even if his subordinates err, Big Boss does not mentor traitors to justice. Ground Zeroes is substantially different from both Metal Gear Solid games I've already reviewed, but it still follows the Metal Gear tradition of 1 step forward and 2 steps back. The new movement options are marred by uncontrollable contextual roadblocks that only serve to make their use inconsistent and reproducibility a chore. 2 designs highly contrary to merit. Thankfully, though, there's no bloating of items or weapons, no excess of pointless levels, no grind, and thank goodness for no red light, green light codec calls interrupting the gameplay. The difficulty isn't amazing, but it is at least functionally good, and the scoring is consistent in practice, if not purely numerically. In terms of net merit, a final score, wherein we account all the deficiencies and accomplishments of the creative work in question, on a scale of 0 to 10, where 0 is worthless garbage to be actively avoided, and a 10 is a perfect piece of art which must be understood, I award Ground Zeroes a 4 out of 10.